and how we're doing a little bit more of a modern perm versus our older iterations from the 80s that were a little bit fluffier. Personally, growing up in the 80s and 90s where you had a lot of those influences of curly hair, and especially things like John Bon Jovi, growing up in New Jersey, in Old Bridge, I was like literally the town over from him. So this guy was like the mecca of, perm craze. But today I'm going over something that's a little bit more fun, a little bit more modern. It's actually an old technique mixed with a modern look. So I'm actually going to be using a highlighting cap to perm the hair. So I found this from a teacher of mine years and years ago when I was going for my teaching license in Ewing, New Jersey, not far from where I am now. And it was actually something that she taught me so that if somebody has like really, really thick, dense hair and they don't want it to be like huge and just voluminous, this actually tamps down about 50% of the hair or however much that you want to pull through. So you can control how much curl you're actually going to get. And then depending on the size of your rod, you can also control your curl or your wave that way as well. So today I'm going to be using a couple of different sizes. These are fairly large rods themselves, but I'm using the orange, I'm going to use black, and I'm also going to use like these green turquoise ones. Now, when it comes to these three sizes, you can see just by staring down the barrel of these things that yes, they're going to give you a much larger wave pattern versus a really tight spiral. A lot of the times we're used to like the gray, white, even the fuchsia colored perm rods. And those are the ones that are going to give you those really tight little curls. Another thing that I like to use also are flex rods. These are fun because you can get a lot more hair just on that one rod versus what you can on a perm rod. But still the exact same thing. You just don't have the exact tension that you would with using a cap, but you can still roll that pretty tight, fold it up, and get a great wave out of the hair. Totally up to you. I'm just choosing to use the perm rods today because they're a little easier to work with. So as you can see from our lovely little model right here, I just chose to use the turquoise and the orange rods just to give her a nice little wave. I pulled about 50% of her hair because I did want a little bit of volume. It was laying a little flat. Now she's actually cut with a little bit of a curtain fringe. So at first it made me a little nervous, but I'm like, wait a minute, all I gotta do is use a larger rod. So that's a little bit lazier. So that's where I used the turquoise one in the front. So that way I can get that looser, kind of lazier wave that blends in with the rest of them. Now you're probably wondering like, okay, what happens to the hair that's underneath? Well, seeing as how the cap is actually putting a little pressure on it, it's keeping the hair from expanding. So basically the cap is going to push that down because we know that the ammonium thio likes to expand the hair shaft itself. So if you don't have something on there, you're basically creating frizz. So the cap helps to keep a little pressure on there. It also doesn't seep through all the little holes because we are going to be wrapping that with a lot of cotton to make sure that it doesn't go all the way through. But it does give a nice little flat wave to the hair. So that's how you marry everything together and you're still getting a nice wave pattern without creating a whole lot of frizz and a whole lot of volume. So let's get into that. One of the things that I find is a lot easier for pulling through for this method is to actually do a bit of a cousin it kind of vibe where you're just combing all the hair from the high point of the head forward and just basically going radially from there. So high point and just comb everything flat down. And then slide your cap on. I like to just tie it a little Bo Peep style. And then we're using our little trusty dusty little perm needle here that is from Color Track. I actually like this one a little bit better than the ones that come with the actual caps. This pulls through the hair a little bit easier, whereas I find the ones that come with it, they kind of create a little bit more frizz than I really want, and they don't grab enough hair. Now, personally, I don't pull through from every single little hole here. I'm actually just using the holes that have the blue circle. Now, again, you can customize this however you like. I'm doing this because I'm not pulling through large amounts of hair. I'm pulling through maybe about like 1/4 inch, I don't know. But basically I'm eyeballing my section because I want a little bit more hair on the top because that's pretty much where all of your curl is going to be living, laying over the rest of it. Now, if you run into a little snag like this one because I went and pulled a little bit too much hair, you can wait until the end because the hair is damp to actually take a paddle brush or something to comb through. So you don't have to get those absolutely perfect as you're pulling through. I like to also make sure that the cap is pretty loose because you don't want to scrape the scalp and cause any abrasions, because we are doing a chemical service. So we want to be careful that we're keeping the hair and scalp health in mind at all times. I learned this from an instructor of mine when I was going for my teaching license, and she used this method in order to customize her perms for really thick-haired guests. So this is how you can control how much curl you're actually going to have in the hair versus trying to just use larger rods for the whole head and then having a much more uniform looking curl that does end up expanding. So with this, we're getting the height of using the rod, but because the hair underneath isn't getting that full rotation curl from the rod, that's a little flatter. So that's why we end up with more of a wave than a full-on full body curl. This is designed for straight, wavy. This is also something that you can use to kind of reset somebody's curl. So if they feel like their natural curl pattern is a little bit lazy, especially on the top of their head, this is a great isolation technique.
Okay, and then does it work well on fine hair?
Absolutely. Because if anything, you're gonna avoid having like those little perm lines that sometimes stick together when you're just doing the perm set itself. And you can pull through all of the hair when it's fine. So another thing that I like to use with my perms and relaxers is Olaplex. It really does do everything that it says for keeping the hair absolutely perfect and gorgeous and healthy. So with the perms, it's 1/16 that you're adding to both your perm solution as well as your neutralizer. And you don't even have to use the step 2 because that would actually weigh the hair down. Now, personally, I've used Paul Mitchell relaxers for a really, really long time. They don't have that same kind of, like rotten eggs or 2 dozen rotten egg smell. And with the Olaplex, that makes the smell just that much more, non-existent basically. And also, you don't have to wait the 48 hours to shampoo your hair. With Olaplex, you can actually shampoo and condition the same day. So another thing that you don't have to have the special perm pillow as some ladies might have had back in the day. When I started out doing hair, I did a lot of perms because I started out at a JCPenney salon, and every January there was perm and relaxer sales. So I did a lot. I never expected to, but I really did. Now, this looks like a crazy little rat's nest right here. So we're just gonna re-wet that, and I'm going to use my, Matt's diamond head brush. So just going to brush through that really quick. This little section right here that wasn't completely pulled through, I'm just gonna give that a little help there, separating it. Now, as I said before, you never ever want to scratch the scalp or irritate it before a chemical service, especially before an ammonium thio or a hydroxide relaxer, because then that's going to irritate the scalp and that can lead to irritation. Another thing that you can do, especially if the hair is highlighted, really, really damaged, and Olaplex is again very wonderful for this, you can actually do a protein treatment with the step 2 and whatever reconstructive protein conditioner of your choice. Like I would say the supercharged moisture from Paul Mitchell, great for basing around the scalp, as well as adding to that step 2 to do a pre-treatment. You would actually put that onto the hair, put them under a dryer, and let that dry completely. First you would shampoo with shampoo 3, or whatever neutralizing shampoo that you have, and then you would proceed with your perm. So a lot of people think that once you have like high lift, keratin, fashion colors, that you can't actually do perms or any type of high heat or very high alkaline chemical service. But with Olaplex, you can. All right, so now we've combed through that. You can see that there's actually, even though the sections themselves seem very fine, when you combine all of that, a lot of hair. And that's only just the top and a little bit of the back section, right? So with the sides, I'm not gonna pull through as much because again, I don't want to create a whole lot of volume in the hair. So really, this is about assessing the hair before you start the service and figuring out with your guests just how much curl they really want. So as I said, I'm just using the little blue circles to pull through. You can use every single one of them, totally up to you. You can actually pull through more hair. To perfect this, I would always recommend trying it out on a mannequin head first, so that way you can perfect and know what your results are. So even though I learned this technique probably about 12 years ago, I've done it a lot, especially for Matt's mannequins, like for his curly cuts. So that way you can get an idea for how a cut is gonna look on curly, wavy, or extra curly hair. And I've customized all of those through the cap perm.
Gina's asking, so you're not giving the body at the root area?
No, it's still at the root, because remember, this is a cap, so it's pretty close to the root. I'm just doing a little looser, so that way it's easier for me to pull through and not scratch the scalp up. But you're still, especially when you're rolling it, you're gonna be creating tension that's gonna give you pretty much down to the root kind of effect. So it's still a regular perm.
So this is a question that I gotta be honest, I have too.
Okay.
How do you keep, and I've seen you do this multiple times and it always is beautiful. So, but I still don't understand it in my head. So how do you keep the unpermed hair from being longer than the permed hair?
Well, that is where, depending on how much hair is left underneath, how long it is, either if it's just a little bit of hair, I actually just kind of roll it up in my fingers and just tuck that underneath the cap. But if it's as long as it is right now, I'll actually take one of the rods, roll that up, so that way any of the perm solution that's coming down is actually touching on those little areas and giving that just a little soft bend.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. Sweet. And then we got Laura says, will it work on our seniors with all gray, more sparse hair?
Oh, absolutely. And also another thing to think about is the fact that anybody that has scalp sensitivities, this is not going directly onto the scalp. So you're actually saving them a little bit of pain and discomfort.
Nice. And I think we did answer this, but I just want to kind of repeat the answer. What about hair in the nape that doesn't pull through?
Well, that's why I'm mainly concentrating on the top layers of the hair. And with the bottom, we know that the nape is very thick. That doesn't really need any help with creating a whole lot of volume. And so that I only do a couple of hairs underneath, just so that I'm making it uniform. But as I said, when you're pulling through, you're lifting the hair and it's creating a little bit of an S wave underneath inside of the cap. So that's why I really don't have to worry about the nape too much. And like I said, the hair is laying over it. That's why we're not creating excessive volume. All right, so now we've started our wrapping, and this is just going to be your typical, not a brick lay, but just your typical wrapping. If the hair is really, really long, then yes, you can do a brick lay pattern. So I'm taking quite a few hairs because, as I said, we're just using these little circles that are here. So I'm just using about 8 of them. Doesn't mean you have to count them. I was just mentioning that. So make sure that you combed everything. So I'm just using typical little carbon comb. You never want to use metal once you start with the whole perming process. That's just a habit of mine. So we're gonna take our perm paper, make sure that we are bookending that. I love that I get to use all of these like school terms, yay. And then I just like to rock back and forth. So that way it almost creates a little bit of a spiral, plus I can get a nice even tension, especially when there's layers already in the hair. Now you can still use your traditional perm tools. So like those little picks that you have, they're just like the little sticks that you can put in between the actual bands and connect them that way. So that way you're gonna have the perfect amount of tension, but you're not gonna have any lines. Always making sure that we are keeping our sections nice and hydrated. I like to pinch everything together. It makes it a little easier with my bookends. I'm gonna go with turquoise for that one. I usually use the turquoise ones right in the face frame. Oh, and we lost one. Because those, as I said earlier, are just a little bit looser. And to me, makes for a little bit more of a convincing face frame because we all pretty much pull our hair back, and that creates a little bit more tension, and most people have a lazier wave in the front of their hair. So to me, I'm trying to make this look as natural as possible. So that's another reason that I'm using the different colors all throughout the hair.
So we got some more questions for you, Danielle.
Okay.
What is a bookend?
Bookend is, well, here, let me show you on this next little section. So that is where we're just taking one of our little perm papers. We're putting that in front of the section. And some people will say that bookending is just like double wrapping. To me, it's like, no, you're actually folding that. You're making like a book.
Cool. Gina's asking, so this is just giving curl on the ends? ? Why not do a skip perm?
Well, no, as you can see, I'm wrapping the entire thing. It's just that I'm not perming the entire head. It's only the hair that I've pulled through that I'm perming. And you can pull through more hair. As I said, this is to customize it to your guest and the expectations that they have. This mannequin was the one that Brian had done in his class last week, where he was showing the foil combs. So it's already highlighted, it has fashion colors, it's pretty thick. But I didn't want to take a lot of hair because seeing as how this is so thick, I would be making that pretty huge. And you can see that just like a regular perm, we're still pretty much filling up that entire rod, but it's not as like solid, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. So personally, I grew up watching a lot of TV. I was a latchkey kid. Not that that's a bad thing. So one of the movies and shows that I used to really love, one, don't judge it. It was just what it was at the time, but The Cosby Show. I love Lisa Bonet. I love that huge cloud of hair that she has. Well, had, because now she's got dreads. Also, Mystic Pizza. That was like a huge cult classic at the time when I was growing up. Julia Roberts had like that huge, voluminous, wavy hair, but it was just absolutely perfect. And so this is kind of reminiscent of those, but with a much more modern twist where we're not like teasing and making it as big as possible. We want that kind of beachy wave that I just woke up like this hair. Because a lot of the times when we think about perms, we think about like the true blue, really bad 80s perms where like they're teased beyond belief. They kind of look like a frizzed out poodle that needs to go to the groomer. And that's not what we're going for. I mean, literally, I could have actually gone through my yearbook and shown you a couple of those bad ones. And if there was actual photographic proof, I'd have shown you mine bad perm. Because yes, I had a jerry curl. All right, so again, we're just doing a little rocking motion so that we can evenly get that hair onto the rod because there are just a little bit of layers in there, uneven length, so that helps. And it also keeps the tension even across the rod, which is very important. I'd already mentioned earlier that ammonium thio, perms, and relaxers, they swell. So if you don't have proper tension on the hair, it will actually create frizz and cracking in the hair. Oh, so there is the Julia Roberts Mystic Pizza reference that I was talking about, where she's got that big wavy hair. But that's the big difference between perms then and perms now, is that then it was just about, the perm itself, making it as tight as possible to make it big, and then cutting like this little hedge of bangs.
Yeah. Which is kind of where these next.
I know it's a really great memory lane that I feel bad that most kids are not going to go through now. Then there was old Sarah Jessica Parker, well before the Sex and the Cities days. And yes, I love that. And these are the ones that I'm saying are the no's of the perm worlds, where it really does depend on the styling and the cut itself and the choice of perm rods. Because for fine hair, you don't actually have to go with the gray or white perm rods like what you would see in this picture.
Yeah.
And yes, I can tell which size rods just by looking at somebody's curl. Okay? And then Lisa Bonet, that was from The Cosby Show, right before she started with the dreads. Love this. This was like hair goals for me, and that's why I ended up with a wave nouveau. Did not like that hairstyle. So mine looked more like Coming to America and not what I was going for.
All right, a couple more here. Oh, this one.
I went to school with quite a few of these.
Yeah, that was definitely my classmates. And then this one, just gotta save the best for last.
This was the late 80s, early 90s geometric perm. I went to school with a couple of these too. This was more of a New York trend later on, almost like salt and pepper in a way.
Yeah, Gary's like, I love it.
Well, that's why I love hair. Like all the eras that we can go through, the way that we can revisit these things and then modernize them, pretty much revamp. You know, that's why when people say, oh, that's dated, and it's like, everything is. Hairdressing is literally just reinventing the wheel over and over and over again. You know, what's new is actually old. So that's why I'm combining this old school perm cap with an old school method of perming. I'm sorry, highlighting cap. Why do I keep doing that?
Nancy needs to know if you can do this on any hair.
Oh yeah, you can do this on any hair, but just know when the hair is already curly, you gotta take a little bit more time with pulling that through. That's the only difference. Practice this on mannequins and figure out your timing, especially when you're doing this on somebody that has thicker hair or already curly hair. Then make sure that you're tacking on a little extra time for yourself and them. Because personally, I take a long time in the salon, and you know, I have guests that they appreciate that. I've even had some new people lately that I forgot to tell you this, Matt. They were saying like, could you just tell the bosses, owners here that I like the vibe that they have, that it's nice and calm, you don't feel like you're rushed, and you don't have other people next to you screaming and yelling.
Yeah, well, that's good. It's good to hear.
So there are different stylists for every guest. So there's nothing wrong with being fast. There's nothing wrong with being slow. There's nothing wrong with being a little particular.
Yep.
So work at your own speed and don't pay attention to what the next person is doing, because I had to learn that the hard way myself in cosmetology school, because yeah, I was the tourist. I still am. There is a little bit of speed that comes with time, but I'm more about the end result and also just sussing out what my guest really needs from their hair, because sometimes people will show you a picture and that's not actually what they want. So you do sometimes need to take that extra time to really customize and make a great experience. And hey, I'm guilty of that, where I can rush through, or I'm just like, you know what, whatever. But again, proper consultation, knowing what it is that you're going for in the end result, that's timeless. You know, the cap itself is so that I can control how much hair is actually getting curled, and then the rest of it will just get a slight wave. So this is basically for your thick-haired guests that want a little bit of wave, but they don't want a full-on extra body perm.
Yes.
Okay.
Tammy's asking, what is the app? The app is, if you go to freesaloneducation.com, that's the easiest way. You can watch it on our website later, or you can download the app from our website. Just click the icon in the front of the page.
All right, so now I'm just getting down to my last perm rod over the cap, just bookending that. When the hair dries out a little bit, I just like to give that a little spray so it'll adhere to the rod better. And again, just giving that a little rockabye baby there, making sure I've got nice even tension. And then for these sections underneath, I'm just gonna give that a light brush.
See if, can you turn that this way?
Sure. Okay. So just giving that a light brush. All of the moisture has pretty much run down the length of the hair, so I don't have to re-wet that. And I'm gonna take larger sections because I'm actually using a larger rod itself. Oh, I missed a little section there. Oh, whatever. We'll just pretend I did that. Okay, so for this, I'm just gonna separate a large section because I want it to be thick enough that, yes, it's going to go around the rod itself, but I want to make sure that the section isn't too thick to where when I put the waving lotion, it's not going to get completely saturated. So always make sure that your sections are like medium width, so that especially if they're a smaller rod themselves, so that way you can get a nice even saturation. Okay? So this is what I was talking about earlier, that for longer hair, I'll just roll that up. So that way, as gravity is taking hold and it's on a plastic surface, it's gonna run down, that I'm not gonna create any type of frizz or uneven curl pattern towards the end. I'm using the larger rod, so that way the curl itself is really, really loose and it's not tight. Now you can also, instead of setting this horizontally, you can set this vertically. So I'll show you that option. So with that, I would pretty much take this on an angle, start at the corner of my rod, and then I would be setting that as I said, vertically rather than horizontally. And again, we know that with cutting, that vertical, you're losing a little bit more weight that way. Only that worked in real life. God. But we do what we got
all
to
the
do.
time and doesn't do anything.
Okay, and that's how I would do it. Well, not how I would, but how this perm was done. Now, seeing as how there's a cap, I don't really go about doing the entire basing of the hairline because, well, the cap is covering all that up. I don't really have to. So for that, I still would use the supercharged moisture just to go gently around the ears or something like that, just to make sure that if there is any solution that comes down, that we're still protecting the skin itself. So just because we are running close to the end of class and I do have an 11 o'clock, I'm not going to do the rest of this hair, but you get the idea that this is how I would finish up just all of that loose hair that's going around the perimeter. Now, you always want to make sure you got lots and lots of cotton, because seeing as how there are holes that we have not punched through, we want to make sure that there is enough cotton in between so that it absorbs a lot of that excess lotion and keeps it onto that section and doesn't just run off of the hair. Okay, so I like to go in between every little section, give it just like a little double twist and fill in all of my little holes.
Makes sense.
And as I said earlier as well, I would also add 1/16 of Olaplex to my waving lotion, apply that over everything, process according to whatever perm that you have, which can be anywhere from like 15 to 25 minutes, depending on if it's acid, if it's alkaline, exothermic. It all depends on the starting point of the hair. This one, I would be using acid just because that's going to close down the hair shaft itself. It's for 50% and tinted hair. I would also, for pre-lightened hair, especially for anybody that's got highlights, balayage, that's where you would want to do that step 2 plus a protein. So that way you can actually repair the hair before you go in with your relaxer, and then you would use the step 1 with the perm itself. So we don't end up with those bad perms like what you saw in the pictures. Okay, and then once I have everything here wrapped up, that's where I'll go right around the perimeter and really wrap that up. And then for the hair in the front, I would do the same thing, putting cotton right around the edges to make sure that everything stays off of the scalp. Now for these sections in the front, I wouldn't actually roll those right against the scalp. I would roll those vertically along the side. So that way that's easier to perm and that you're not going to irritate anybody's scalp or their eyes by having a perm solution so close. All right, so as you can see, we've got everything nice and wrapped up to where it looks like a little cloud, and we've just got our little perm rod sticking out from the top of that. So that's why I'm saying that you really want to make sure that it covers everything, so that way it's not going to just sluice off of the cap itself and be dripping all over the place. But of course you would want to add another layer of a towel, so that way it keeps your guests happy and comfortable. And that's how this perm set equals this result. So we have a nice flatter wave pattern rather than a really lifted and voluminous kind of curl pattern. So this mimics a little bit more of a natural wave. So I hope you guys got a lot out of today's class, some little tips and tricks and something to try. And if you want, you can try this same set with the flex rods instead of the actual hard perm rods. So if you actually do try this, please tag me. I would love to see it. So you can find me at the Hands Downs, and I'm trying to get good about responding to messages, so just bear with me, but definitely I want to be part of that community, and just everybody share your ideas and your ahas. Thanks for tuning in.